So a bit about myself, Grant Steele, I think you mentioned before. I've had 16 years with Langerock, previously coming to the light side, which is mass timber. I work for Exlam. They're an established service provider and mass timber manufacturer, supplying products out of the Albury-Wodonga facility on the New South Wales Victoria border, and then GLT out of the Maryborough Queensland facility. So I think about procuring mass timber and just need to know the things to consider. Probably worth touching on a few of these key considerations first before we get stuck into the fundamental costs. So, right, apologise about that. So the first things to acknowledge straight away are DFMEA, Design for Manufacturing and Assembly. So I think it's key for architects, engineers and the likes to design the mass timber elements with a knowledge of what the actual supply chain capabilities are. So it's important to know your supply chain. Classic example is a standard shipping container, I would say. Internal dimensions are limited to 2.3 meters wide, meaning that the maximum panel width can be no more than, say, 2.2, 2.5 meters wide. So the opposite of this is truck deliveries on a flatbed. These are less restricted and would enable the efficiencies of wide panel format and delivery, so more efficient installation. On the structural side, I think it's true to say that the classic 9-meter grid is not efficient in mass timber structures. Timber will certainly never replace a 200mm PT slab. Onto acoustics, CLT is it's got measurable acoustic properties. The performance is easily evaluated, but I'll say careful consideration needs to be given to the actual flank and sound transmission. So you want to avoid air gaps, service ducts, kind of shade elements across two tenancies. The manufacturer should be able to help you to advise on this acoustic performance of the CLT panels with different floor and wall builds easy enough. And should also be able to actually provide you with tips for mitigating the flank and transmission as well. On to fire, probably one of, is not the most important topics. So from May 2019, changes were made to the NCC. They introduced the deemed to satisfy provisions, which allowed timber buildings for class 2 to 9 up to effective height of 25 meters. Outside of these parameters, you're into performance solutions. So on that, it's critical that the actual mass timber provider provides you with the actual support on this topic to aid the compliance. So spanning tables, test reports, certifications, and other information on its manufactured products. This is to actually aid the sign off by the fire engineer and the building surveyor. So I'll pick up more on this topic later. Last item on this slide is vibration. Timber is a relatively lightweight form of construction. It requires a little bit more consideration when it comes to the vibration of design. Stiffer floors mean typically perform better. More mass typically performs better. Sometimes it's necessary to include dampers to add more mass to the floor. A couple more considerations. Upfront design. So the mass timber requires a significant investment of upfront design, more so than traditional in-situ concrete. Good example of this is early coordinated building services. It's recommended that penetrations and the like can be actually considered in combination with a structural and fire design. Otherwise, you may be inviting a little bit of trouble in terms of manufacturing delays and possible redesign costs. The last one is moving on to today's key topic, which is about cost comparisons. So probably start by saying that it's true that timber prices have increased of late, certainly from overseas. What I've been experiencing is that imported material costs have risen by around about 33% over the last 6 to 9 months. However, material costs, they shouldn't be considered in isolation. I think you need to acknowledge the overall benefits that you are delivered out of building with mass timber. I think I'll touch on these now, but Richard will touch on them later. Typically, these are found in quicker programs. You'll get lighter foundations, reduced site prelims, mitigated secondary structures. It's safer, it's quieter, etc. So moving on to probably the main part of the presentation is, so we're looking out for costs and what should we consider when we're trying to procure mass timber. I've put together a list. It's true to say there's probably between 14 and 20 items which I think you have a bearing on cost, which you need to consider. So these are listed here from top to bottom, ranging from the actual design, development and certification right through to the after sales support. So I'll touch on each one of these in a little bit more detail in the next few slides. Starting with design and certification, probably establish who's going to be responsible for finalizing the design of the structure, and will it be a requirement of the manufacturer to assist in this requirement? I think I would encourage you to see what certifications and test data each manufacturer has to support this. And it's critical to see if these manufacturers have certifications to acknowledge the local standards. Sorry, just jumped ahead a bit there. Yeah. So on the manufactured material, it's normal for the actual manufacturer to allow for provisional sums in the quotes, especially where the actual design hasn't been fully developed. Australia manufactures products with radiata pine, spotted gum, Victorian ash, and the Europeans typically manufacture out of spruce. So just please bear in mind that redesign costs are maybe necessary if you're switching from one to the other where geometries need to change. On connections, similar to materials, these will no doubt be a provisional sum until the actual final design is finalized. It's important on connections to check which connections have been provisioned and allowed for in the manufacturer's quotation. You need to ask whether these are cheap to buy for the manufacturer, but they're going to be very, very difficult to install for the installer. You also need to inquire whether these connections are going to be partly pre-assembled onto the timber units or whether they're going to be supplied loose. And also, if they are going to be supplied loose, if there are going to be any preparations done in the timber to actually receive the connections, because they can often arrive with no through holes and the rest of it. Good tip I can offer on this one with connections is to ask the manufacturer for the bill of quantities for what he's allowed for in the connections and an overall weight or mass of the actual steel that he's allowed for. Moving on to shop drawings. Obviously, you need to ask whether it's inclusive of shop drawings and what the quality of these shop drawings will be. Ask whether they'll be developed into loading diagrams such that these can assist the site or the storage facility at the receiving end. Typically, the manufacturer shop drawing processes start at LOD 350 as a minimum, so you need to consider this with your incumbent engineer such that that gets up to that status before it's handed over. On the surface finish, it nearly always carries cost implications. What I can say is it's a hugely subjective topic. I think what I would say is that it's worth seeing what the manufacturer is planning to offer you. So I would advise that you request samples from them, or at least high resolution images, and then ask them to actually forward on the manufacturing specification to articulate and describe what that surface finish is going to be. Timber treatment being another additional cost. So radiata pine is a molecular structure which is receptive to pressure impregnation of treatment. However, there are many other species which will not be. So it's best to check what others are offering in terms of the Red3 class treatment, because they may not well be certified to the local standards, certainly not to ES 1604. The alternative to this that I've seen offered is like more of a topical protection, where it's actually just a veneer that's protected, and it will require some ongoing inspection, certainly ongoing costs to actually maintain. So you've got to think about the legacy cost of that as well. Other thing is protective coatings. Suppliers typically offer a range of protective coatings. These range from end grain inhibitors, which stop the water ingress, right through to UV protections and abrasion protections. Some elements, probably true to say, will need more protection than others. Certainly columns and elements that are at the facade, which are exposed to UV exposure, but also like high traffic areas as well. Next one is protective covering. How does the product arrive? You need to just ask yourself the questions about whether they're going to be protected or whether they're going to be extracted from a container, perhaps unprotected. And if they are, what then happens? Are they going to be installed straight to site, or do they need to actually be stored from that point onwards? On the timber protection, you don't want fully encapsulated because timber needs to breathe. So it needs to have some kind of aerated cover on there. Our products, for example, is covered on every surface except the actual bottom surface to allow that breathing to occur. So just be mindful when you're asking about protection, how it's going to be protected. Transport. So all the mentioned earlier, are the elements going to be restricted by the mode of transport? Containers are 2.3 meters wide, as I said before. A very, very important one is to ask whether the actual deliveries are going to be in accordance with the installation sequence. I've got experience of deliveries which have maximized the efficiency of transportation, but have fallen out of sequence with the site. What it has meant is there's been quite a significant amount of reconfiguration work, which you have to break down the pack, uncover it, and effectively double handle it to get it back into its correct sequence. So you're introducing more risk there about potentially damaging the component, or introducing more opportunity for the components to be exposed to the elements. So it's important, that one. Another one is always check where the seller's liability ends and where the buyer's liability starts. So check the Incoterms and get all over that one. If you're considering coming in from overseas and you're importing the goods, I mean this is probably worth a presentation in its own right, but there's a lot of costs associated with getting it in terms of importation charges, fumigations, the domestic handling, the storage costs, and then delivery to site. So I would say that the import charge, including the duties and the levy fees and the port handler charges, amount for about 50% of this. You've got your customs clearances and fumigations, which are the extra 20%, and then the final handling of like the third-party operator and the storage, then delivery site is probably the last 30%. So an order of thumb, just to give a value to that, it's around about $175 to about $250 per cubic meter you should be allowing for the actual the domestic care for the product. Moving on from some of the costs to the commercial considerations, the European suppliers of mass timber typically want upfront payments. This can often present significant cash flow implications. If there are payment bonds which will be required to look after those down payments, these will be additional costs that you need to actually keep an eye out for. Warranty and durability, maybe think about if the supplier is not local or not able to contact easily. How do you actually go about fixing or correcting some durability issue? And finally, foreign currency fluctuations. It goes one of two ways. You can actually get caught on the upside. So you need to actually have a risk mitigation measure, whether you hedge your currency or you want to take the risk, but something to bear in mind all the same. So just to offer a summary of my few slides there. I think timber costs, if you assess them in isolation, probably don't tell the true story, maybe look expensive for what they are, but it's probably only part of the picture. I'd say that once the associated benefits, the direct and the indirect, once they're measured holistically, mass timber is very competitive. And then you roll into the actual green credentials, the actual health and safety, the well-being. It's quite safe. It's very quiet. So there's a lot of indirect benefits to also consider there. In terms of compliance, I would say it's very, very important. It's critical that the mass timber manufacturers demonstrate that the products are certified and that they can actually support the engineers locally here in order to actually meet the requirements of the Australian standards. I think otherwise it's going to be up to a third party to demonstrate that the incumbent standards of the manufacturer, wherever it's been made, would actually meet the requirements of the Australian standards. If you can't get that kind of process to happen, then you're into some significant costs for testing here locally. So typical cost of AS 1530 is probably ranged between 15 and 30 grand. And the other thing to bear in mind, it's not going to happen overnight either. Second last point, I would say on the quoting, the actual devil's in the detail. I think like all aspects, you have to really get through and understand what it is that you should be asking for and what it is that you should be looking out for. So hopefully this presentation, some of the things I've mentioned earlier, will go some way to actually helping that process. Final point for me is that, timber prices may look like that they're expensive in isolation of the actual overall benefits. You may hear stories about the prices going up, but so is the value of timber. The benefits that come with it, are quite well publicised now. So I would hope that, what you're hearing, what you're seeing, and what you've actually learned today would only help the assistance. So that's all for me. Welcome to invite any questions, but otherwise roll back yourself, Andrew.
Okay, thanks, Grant. And said like a good person trying to flog some material at the last comment. Excellent. And if you just let go of your screen and I'll hand over to Richard. So Richard, up to now yours.
Okay, guys, thanks for joining in. So I'm going to talk about, I think a lot of what Grant ran you through there is really important. I'm hoping the slides will be shared afterwards in some format, because there's a lot of information that sort of Grant's passed on that you need to consider. And certainly we agree with all of it, right? I mean, from my neck of the woods, I mean, it's important to say that I'm a quantity surveyor, right? And I've put this slide up just to sort of make sure you understand that, I'm a QS. What I say can't be subjective. It can be wrong, and that's fair, but I think, you can scrutinize anything I say today. But I think it's important that the QS, is not a salesman or a charlatan. We have to, if we're going to say concrete's $350 a cube, it has to be $350 a cube, right? I think what I'm seeing at the minute is that pricing is moving around a lot, and that's in response to all kinds of things. But I mean, the big piece of advice I give you is you have to speak to experts, because there is a lot of misinformation out there at the minute, and especially around something like timber, where the data is not as widely available as it might be for more traditional methods of construction, right? So that's important. The good news for everyone, or apart from builders, of course, is that the pricing post-COVID is low, right? I mean, we've had some tenders back in only 20 minutes ago, and these tenders are not way below, but certainly below our pre-tender estimate, and our pre-tender estimates are based on tenders that came in 2 weeks ago. So you can see that I thought the pricing would have stabilized by now, given that we sort of Australia sort of appears to be on the outs of the COVID influence, but what we see is that builders are still looking for work, so pricing is fiercely competitive, and that's affecting timber as much as it's affecting traditional, albeit in not quite the same way, but nonetheless, I mean, what we're seeing is that the construction pricing remains low. So I think I know some of my colleagues in the industry have been predicting a big spike is coming, but it's not coming yet, and that's important, right? And I think to give some context to what I'm about to talk about is it's important to understand that 2021 and the 6 months prior that in the middle of COVID was probably the strangest 12 months ever. You certainly couldn't teach this kind of stuff at university. Nothing you can ever be taught at university would prepare you for this. I mean, there's all kinds of conflicts and disconnected pieces of data that just don't make any sense. I mean, we're seeing house prices are skyrocketing, even though construction prices are low and cash is cheap and all the rest of it. Developers are building office towers, which flies in the face of some of the ideas that were sort of being brought out a little while ago, that everyone was going to be working from home. And when I see all this conflict and contradiction, it tells me that something is happening, and I'm going to talk about that in a second. So I'm here, of course, to talk about costs. I think Grant has covered a lot of the process costs. I'm going to talk about a real job in a second, but I think it is important to acknowledge that timber is increasing in price, and I think I agree with Grant. I think it has gone up about 30% over the last 9 to 12 months, and that's for us to consider, of course, and we need to be on top of that. As an aside, though, we all know, lots of guys out there will know that reinforcement has also increased massively as well. I think one thing I wanted to say was that increase in timber pricing is understandable from my point of view. I mean, and I hope Andrew will sort of back me up on this. It appears to be a simple sort of supply and demand pinch point, and it's partly as a result of more countries around the globe building out timber, and certainly there's the methodology is taking off here in Australia for sure, because I've been doing this for building out timber for sort of 15 years, and I've seen exponential growth year on year. So that's certainly backs up that point. Of course, the COVID, import export conditions have changed as well, right? So I think my summary here is that timber pricing will return to normal in the next 12 months. Reinforcement, some of the other trades that are currently sat low or moving around might not, and that's important. So as much as I like to deal in theory, I have got a real example here of it's a current office project. It was priced as both as a timber option as well as a concrete steel option. So these are real numbers that I'm about to show you here, and they do speak to a story and back up what I'm sort of telling you already. I think it's important to note that this job is for a big old client. It's not it's not some back alley pretender, but it is a big client. The builders that priced it were sort of reputable tier two builders. And the consultant team, I have to say, we're an educated set of professionals. That made a big difference here, because it meant that, speaking to what Grant was talking about earlier, where you need an informed inputs here to avoid that misinformation and to avoid some of the mistakes that we should have been getting over by now. It really helps set up a good process here. So I think if I was going to ask you a question, sort of suggest what cheaper, which is cheaper at the minute, timber or concrete. I don't know if any of you have got any ideas out there. I'm sure you'll all be shouting back different things, whether it's in some kind of auditorium. But the point is, of course, that you're all correct, because there are so many variables, so many variants to the inputs that the results are never clear cut. Even in traditional construction, that's true. So timber and concrete can compete. And here's the data for the exercise I'm talking about. It was a sort of mid-rise office project, which is obviously the title of this presentation. And we, as MBM, as a quantity surveyor, we do what we do best, which is measure everything. We price it, the traditional option, the timber option. So we're pricing as prepare a pre-tender estimate, and then we will proceed to tender and see how we fared. So this drawing is actually one of Andrew Dunn's old timber models. Now, interestingly enough, Andrew can claim the royalties on this. The actual project we were working on didn't look too dissimilar to this in the sense it was a 6-story big old rectangle, right? I can't tell you where it was, unfortunately, but it is in Sydney. But yeah, so generally speaking, when I have worked on this, and I've been doing this timber talks for a long time now with Andrew, and this project that we had previously priced did look relatively similar to the actual real life project we're dealing with now. So here's the tender data that came back, right? And this, so what I've done here is I've picked the not the lowest tender, not the highest tender, because this is also an interesting point to make, is that the tenders came back. There was sort of a 20% difference between the lowest price bidder to the highest price bidder, and that's even that is interesting to me, because as QS, we're trying to understand what that data actually says, and of course, you know, if you looked at the profile of each of those bidding builders, you would see that their pricing sort of reflected their personality. Builders do have a personality, in the sense that, you know, you have one guy totally aggressive, totally keen to win the job, whereas you have another one who's sort of a bit more cautious around a market, particularly around the timber pricing, and pricing risk and all that stuff that builders throw into timber pricing. All that stuff was coming out in the sort of tender analysis that we did. So we reviewed the concrete price first, and you can see down there you've got a sort of $62 million total tender number. This is an office space, of course. You can read into these numbers which way you will. I mean, and lots of this stuff, you know, be it demo, basements and site service and things, were common across both options. You know, preliminaries, margin, you see preliminaries there about 22%, but essentially you had a $60 million job that was priced just to be shown. So when the timber option envelope was open, what we saw was this. I mean, I have to say, there's no way around it. It was a slightly more expensive, but to the point of being negligible. You know, it's like, I think it's 300 grand more expensive. And if you know, sort of keen observers, and I'll show you the slide in a second, would have noticed that, you know, the superstructure costs were more expensive, and that's partly as a result of the current timber pricing. You can see though that the preliminaries pricing is much lower, right? And that's because you could build the timber office quicker, and that's, you know, that's not me telling you that, that's the 5 builders telling you that. So I think, and that was interesting. I mean, again, there's lots of commonality here between site services, the demo and stuff. It's more that the superstructure and the timber-based pricing was slightly more expensive. Again, you made that up on the prelims, and you can see those differences here, right? You've got that superstructure, the commercial office tower, where you've got the $1.5 million premium for the timber and a $1.5 million saving on the timber as well. So I think all that data, when analysed for me as a QS, tells me that even timber in its worst profile that it's been in a while, simply because of that supply and demand pinch point, still can compete with traditional construction. What it also tells me is that even though you know, this is a fiercely competitive market at the minute, it's only so low that concrete construction can go, right? And you see, and you look at the savings on preliminaries, and you see that speed aspect, and that potential to value time, commercialize time, and the need to lock in revenues earlier. And you can see that timber has a future, and I think that shouldn't be lost on anyone out here, because even this commercial office, you know, the fact that we had to spend more money to produce a timber building and superstructure, you know, we can save that in prelims, and it has to be said, you know, this premium that we paid for, that we were seeing in the tender returns for the office and the timber construction of it. There was a lot that we could do there, and certainly there was a lot I felt that we could sit down with the builders and negotiate and take some of the risk out of that, because there was risk in there simply because of the current position for timber, and the fact that, you know, this thing was going to be built it's currently going to be built later on in the year now. Timber pricing will return to normal, and that's really, really, really important, because, you know, as a QS and as someone speaking to you today, I can guarantee that, because we can already see the pipeline of work, and we can see that there is a pipeline of work here, and there's absolutely the establishments in, you know, Grant's own company here in Australia, there's some of the other companies around the nation as well as the overseas suppliers. They're all super keen to work here. Why wouldn't you be, right? Because it's obviously proved itself during the COVID pandemic. So I think that the future timber, it's probably only ever going to look as bad as this, in the sense that it can compete dollar for dollar with traditional. This situation is going to get better, and that's important. So you can see, I mean, the result was too close to call, and less than 1% difference. So that's, you know, that's telling to me as a quantity surveyor. Yeah, so just to highlight some of that preliminary savings, because we did assume, of course, the same crane, scaffold, site sheds, etc. Essentially, pretty much the same setup. You know, timber's still being craned around the site, right? But I think the difference was the time saving, which even the more conservative builders were suggesting could actually take place. You know, a dry site is obviously much quicker than a site where you're waiting for things to cure and set, right? So I think that 9-week savings that we saw within the tender returns was pretty much, I have to say, was pretty much consistent across all 5 tenders. And there were some anomalies, of course, there are, but that would have come out in the wash if we got down to negotiation. And yeah, I think we were coming, certainly as a QS, we predicted about 8 weeks. The builders were saying about 9 weeks saving. So that was, yeah, that was comforting to see. So I think there's some important points to take from this stage in the conversation, right? The timber is a little higher than concrete in terms of material costs. That's fair, and it's it's unavoidable. But the sort of tangible and intangible benefits to timber methodology that need to be considered. I know Grant touched on them, but I think it's sort of worth reiterating. It's quicker. In this modern age, it's got some serious kudos to it at the minute, and I think that early revenues, that speed. I mean, and I'm working in the education sector, and speed is everything. Because ministers want to appear on television and say this job is going to be done day one, term one. It's harder to do that with concrete. It's also harder to do that, I have to say, with an uneducated construction industry. So I think the ability for timber or anything actually, not allegiance to timber, it's more any product that sort of can be done or can help build things quicker. The FMA is absolutely part of that. It's going to get a lot of weight. It's going to carry a lot of weight in the next few years. So speed is probably not being commercialised quite as much as it might have been in the past. And I think timber absolutely helps that, right? I mean, I also see, and we all know the rates that it's got for the Barranbury commercial building down there, and we see that timber has got some commercial appeal now. And I think that that is doesn't always come across in the quantity surveying reports that we do. But I think in this, I think as quantity surveying evolves over the next few years, we're going to have to factor that in, because it definitely has a commercial appeal. I think that one of the problems I see as a quantity surveyor, and I deal with it a lot, is that I think it's hard to obtain reliable pricing on timber, just because there are certain conservative sort of organisations out there who are struggling with the idea of not building in traditional construction materials, and that's fine. That's easy. We can help those guys. Acknowledge the risk is small, and that we can help these guys counter all the potential obstacles they see. We absolutely see contractors pricing in risk, but we also know, I know as a QS now, I've done lots of sort of timber tenders. I know before I open the envelope what contractor will be pricing risk, which contractor will be a little bit more, I don't want to say brave, a little bit more comfortable and more informed as to the material usage. So I think there's a need here to avoid a lot of that misinformation in the market, because there's lots of it. I see it all the time, right? And I think that as well, I mean, as this misinformation is sort of is put out there, I think it's important to remember that the gap between timber and concrete was always tight anyway. So when I was doing these talks 3 years ago, timber was always cheaper when you actually when you scrutinise the material costs and the building tenders. What's happening this minute is that gap is drawn closer. But what I see in the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years is that timber's going to start beating traditional, and prefabrication is also going to enter the market in a much more wholesale place as well. So I see where the direction is going. I just think it's important that you speak to the right people in terms of getting that information to you and your job. And I also see, I mean, I do see that there is some, in terms of using timber, there is still a trade based demographic that is still sort of coming to terms with it and accepting that, you know, you will have to appear on site a little bit quicker than you might have done with a setting slab. So what, I mean, this is an important observation as well, right? Again, it's what I'm seeing that in this post-pandemic period, in this period where builders are looking to fill order books for the next 12 months, I'm seeing the builders' pricing strategy have evolved slightly. I'm seeing way more lateral thinking, more willingness to contribute meaningfully to ECI processes. There's much less smoke and mirrors, and of course they're still out there. And builders' tenders are, you know, learning how to read a builders' tender is a university course all on its own, right? But I think that what I'm seeing now is a willingness to contribute is unusual. You know, the whole COVID period that sort of forced us to step back and think for a little while, I think has done us a lot of good, more value than sort of we probably realise at the minute. And I see that collaboration and contribution is going to provide all kinds of benefits actually in the next few years. And I think that timber is actually part of that. And I think because of its added benefits is around wellness essentially, and its speed and its sustainability benefits, I see that that's going to help timber in these new conversations that are happening. So to this stage in the talk, I just wanted to sort of just summarise quickly. I mean, there is a lot of misinformation in the market. That's for sure. Ask a specialist. That's the simple line, and more specialists will come on board as this thing evolves. Of course, they will. DFMA is everywhere. You see the schools, education sector is pushing this, and so the revolution is coming, whether we like it or not. It's happening. The prefab was always going to come anyway. Timber was always going to re-enter the construction lexicon, right? So I think that's really important, and it's, you know, as much willful denial as sort of we want to put up with, it's coming. It's clear as day that we're not going to be building with bricks in the rain in the next 20 years. It's just obvious to me. So I think that whilst there's always a place for traditional construction, I think, you know, timber, prefab construction, all that stuff, which all of which can work together, I might add, is coming. And again, just to prove that I'm not being paid by the wood solutions here. You know, timber is not always silver bullet. It actually sometimes does not work, and that's really important. You know, so I think every job should be assessed on its own merits, of course. Sometimes it works, and sure as hell, sometimes it doesn't. So that's, you know, that's important. I like the fact that timber is sort of part of the more progressive dictionary, because I know we've all sat in meetings recently. We even have meetings at lunchtime now on Friday afternoons, which has changed things for me as a quantity surveyor, but nonetheless, I think, you know, we're hearing the more progressive language around sustainability, less waste, health and safety. I think they're entering the lexicon now, and obviously that obviously backs up or timber supports that well. I've really ended up in a lot of interesting boardrooms over the last 18 months talking about timber, and I have to say, a lot of times timber is rejected right at the last hurdle, and not for any other reason than there is a psychological dilemma. And it's been interesting to prove an estimate and see tenders come back that support timber, and yet still have it rejected at the last hurdle. And that to me is interesting, but it tells me that there is a revolution coming, only because there's only so many times that you can sort of deny the evidence, and I think that's going to be interesting to see if that does, if that ascent of timber does continue, because it is appearing in more big companies' thoughts now, and I expect that to continue. I do, and the fact that it's been, you know, coming back to the same boardroom twice at least tells me it's not coming back once. You know, it's coming back twice and 3 times, and sure as heck, you know, eventually this stuff will get up. You can see that no one earns 15% profit anymore. I mean, I think it was in this current market, you know, we think profit's going to, you know, I mean, some of the profits we're seeing at the minute is sort of stated as 1%, which is just a, you know, which is just unfortunately a result of a tight market at the minute. Even profit, you know, getting up to, you know, 3, 4, 5%. I think we're going to have to look for other ways to find our returns, and that will come from some of the commercialization of timber and its benefits that I'll talk about in a second. Collaboration is, of course, the future, and that's sort of lends itself to what I was talking earlier about this COVID situation that we found ourselves in this last 12 months. I think we find ourselves talking virtually for a start, which is you know, something that we're doing right now, of course. But I see a return. You know, I look out the window and I see people. The cafes down here are full, so that's good. I think collaboration is the future, and I think picking good partners and good people to work with and experts and avoiding misinformation is also part of that way forward. I just wanted to sort of finish with a few things that most QS reports wouldn't include, but which will be commercialized, and that's sustainability, waste, speed and ease of construction, that human perspective, and also that new design palette that architects and designers and engineers, of course, can draw from. I mean, sustainability is an easy one, simply because it's everywhere now, and it is part of the model language, and so it should be. I mean, construction has done a horrendous job of even thinking about sustainability for a long time. It's a small percentage of us that have actually been thinking about this and then trying to, you know, embody it in most of the projects. But when you see the smart guys, the big 4 finance firms, for instance, having huge departments built around sustainability and commercializing it, we know that it's going to enter our construction projects, and absolutely so it should be. So I think, you know, timber is obviously it's got fabulous benefits in terms of sustainability, and you can see the points up there. I'm going to sort of round off in a second, so I won't go through every point that I've listed here, but you can see what they are, and I know that you've sort of crossed this before. I mean, the lack of, the benefits of reduced on-site waste are obviously huge. Reduced waste within the manufacturing process is also a good thing. And timber, of course, is reusable, right, and recyclable. So I think that's, again, another thing that adds to timber's advantages. Speed, as I mentioned earlier, is going to be everything. I think speed and quality are going to come more to the fore, because I think cost is going to be, whilst it's always important, of course. I think, you know, the old adage was, you know, you can have speed, time, quality, pick 2, right? And I think that was always a bit of a lazy myth, and certainly was extended and supported by lots of builders out there. But I think we can have all 3, we really can, and I think timber is part of that solution, and it is faster, it just is. So, and I think an educated builder would happily tell you that. And the ease of construction, you know, of course, you know, the lack of reducing the on-site resources and the labour, reduction in noise, vibration and dust, easy manufacturing process, and that ability to scrutinise in greater detail the work that's going on should keep our new building commissioner happy. I think even Mr. Chandler himself might view with a slightly cynical eye, and rightly so, you know, new methodologies that come into the market. But I mean, I think once he sort of sees how timber works, how prefabrication works, I think he's going to be supporting it ultimately. And I think that's you know, the building commissioner isn't going away. His legislation is going away. So I think timber absolutely supports his. The human perspective I really love. I mean, this is something that is very hard to commercialize or to put a dollar on. But let me tell you, there's lots of people out there trying to do this. Lots of people smarter than me, I know, because I get the phone calls all the time. And I see that well-being, the natural environment, you know, aesthetics, all this stuff is absolutely coming to the fore now. It's becoming more a part of a modern meetings conversation, and that to me is interesting. So I think whilst it's not in the QS report at the minute, it's something that does lend itself to timber, which timber absolutely supports. And the design palette is always interesting, because I know there's architects on this call, and for me personally, as a human being, not as a quantity surveyor, you know, I see timber builds, and I think there's a fabulous potential to build something that's not a glass box, right? And some of the timber awards winning buildings have really been quite inspiring, and you know, And I think there is a future there. There is a potential there. There's absolutely potential to work with existing traditional materials. And if I was an architect, and I'm absolutely not, if I were, I'd be pretty excited. And of course, the risk is important, because we are absolutely in the wake of everything that's gone on in the last 24 months. Actually, some of the sort of horrendous projects we've seen, and some of the horrendous accidents we've seen. I think minimising all that risk and the quality control and on-site accidents, that's super important. And again, it's going to enter the modern conversation. There are the savings. You'll see at the minute, the prelims, reduced substructure, for lighter construction. I haven't got superstructure in there at the minute, simply because I don't think there is a saving in superstructure at the minute. It was in my last talk 12 months ago. It's not in this one, just simply because I have an obligation. Sorry to be honest here. So, but the speed and all the benefits you can see there are real savings. And whilst not all of those would equate to a savings in quantity surveyors report, they will eventually, as the quantity surveyor evolves. So yeah, so there's lots of key points there. I think timber does work in poor soils. When I see a lot of the projects we have in the office at the minute that are adapting old buildings, it is good for that. And there's lots of engineers around town who will help you with this. It's a bang on trend for big corporates and ideological organisations, which is, I think, in the face of everything that goes on in the news nowadays, most corporates would be leaning that way now. In an age of increased scrutiny on quality and safety, I think timber absolute rules. I really do. Same as prefabrication. Prefabrication is in place as well. It obviously ticks a lot of green star boxes. And the biggest takeaway from this talk, I think, for you as a consultant or developer or whoever, is make sure you speak to the right people, because there are a lot of charlatans out there. There are a lot of salesmen out there. I think, as much as I don't want to pick up my own profession, I think the QS with the cost data is always a good point to start. Right? Ended it with a sensationalist slide. The revolution has already started, and I think that's true. I only know because I think 10 years ago when I started doing this, and I always give an update every slide. I had 10 timber jobs. I think this year I looked at maybe 127. So you can see that. You can see how much growth there is there. I think that growth is going to continue. Okay, guys, thanks ever so much.
Okay, well, thank you, and thank you for all going through that presentation. There was a little bit of background noise with Richard's presentation, but we'll put up with that. But I'm just going to now ask some of you questions in the last 5 minutes we have. So the first question was one to Richard from Franklin. What software is used by the QS to calculate the cost of the construction?
That's the biggest thing.
We use a couple of things. Costex and BuildSoft. Still the preeminent QS software of choice, right? So they're the main ones we use. That's just they sort of tie into architects and engineers' drawings, so they're still the preeminent software packages. Costex and BuildSoft.
Okay, one from Tony. Is there an economy of scale where a small project doesn't stack up for CLT? And maybe Grant, you might want to jump in first.
What I have done, I do the other way around. I instead of
there can be several mitigating factors which would tip, and it maybe it comes from the compliance requirements. Maybe that it's really to do with the structural. If the actual span is say 7.5 meters. So yeah, I think without understanding the exact application, it's difficult to say at the moment.
Okay, Richard, do you want to make a comment?
There really are, unfortunately, Andrew, there are no hard and fast rules. I think you have to assess each job on its own merits, and often the solution is one of a hybrid of things. I mean, the important thing to remember is, of course, that timber wouldn't always be ruled out just as a matter of course. I mean, the smaller jobs, you see plenty of domestic houses, for instance, working in timber. We do those estimates all the time. But I think it's just a case of you have to assess a job on its merits and perhaps procure materials in a slightly different way, from a smaller timber supplier, from a timber supplier that's perhaps got some stock, so there's lots of things that would need to be considered, but it would never be ruled out just a matter of course. No way.
Okay, all right. Next question is from Kieran, and this one I'm going to answer myself because there's a leeway or a segue to another webinar. So have you had any experience in costing timber warehouses versus steel warehouses, and do you think that it could be a growing market? Well, yeah, I'm going to answer that one because that's going to be a subject of a future webinar towards the end of this month, and where there has been a comparison done between steel and timber warehouse type structural industrial buildings. There is also a wood solutions guide on that subject matter. It was updated last year and it may be available to have a look there, but that presentation will be given towards the end of the month. And yes, there is an opportunity in the growth market. There is a certain trick to getting the best prices out of timber compared to steel. Otherwise they're pretty comparative in costs. So that's for a future one. Just more questions. Okay, there's one question on when timber is used in construction, we face termite issues. What is the industry doing about a solution to that? Grant, do you want to comment on that one?
Yes, certainly. I touched on it earlier. So it's sapwood and heartwood are receptive to timber treatments. You can impregnate the actual solution. So an H3 class treatment, which XLAM's products have a proprietary solution which complies to the AS1604. So that timber that we would supply would be treated for termites and infestation. Beyond that, you would obviously introduce hard barriers and the likes.
Yep, and I'll just add to that the solution that you're using, the AS3660 of termite management of structures is applicable to these other buildings. And most of these buildings are built on concrete structures which are out of the ground, so there's a good head start. All right, I'm going to say thank you to Grant and Richard for their presentation, and thank you for the audience for putting up some of that background noise. That was I hope that gave you a bit of insight. Of course, we can't go into all of the issues with costings, but I think you got from both the speakers where talk to the experts, and we have an expert on the QS side being Richard, and we also have an expert on the supply side being Grant. So take advantage of them and to do the homework to work out what your price is, because as you can see, it's not just quite an easy job. So just finishing up the presentation, just want to run through through various bits and pieces. We have remember, this is available for later on, sort of a download, should be up there within a week. The certificates will be sent to you by email post this presentation, and shortly that will include the questions, and so please store them in a safe place because they won't be reissued. Also, a part of that email will be a question and answer survey. Could you please fill it out, because it's very useful for us to understand what you want to hear. The next webinar is going to be on the 25th of May, and that's looking at timber specification certification and getting the outcomes you need. So it'll be interesting to hear that one. But also to introduce, we're back to doing live presentations. So we have our first Wood Solutions seminar on the 3rd of June in Sydney, which is a mass timber and timber frame construction update. So it's we've been hiding for a while, and we have the seminar contains 3 case studies on an office building, the Phoenix forming space, and a timber stadium, and a few other questions on passive house design and hybrid timber construction. So that's going to be an interesting one. So anybody in Sydney, please register. It's available for registration through the Wood Solutions event website. We're also going to do that seminar in Canberra in late June, date yet to be determined. So we're back to face-to-face, and with that will be some of the suppliers will be there, so it'll be good to get out and have a real chat with people face to face and in a COVID safe environment. So wrapping up, I'd like to say thank you again to our speakers, Grant and Richard, the experts in particular areas. So I appreciate your time today, and all to say now is we'll thank you and see you at the next webinar or seminar. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you, folks.
Thank you.
Cheers, guys.
Thanks, Richard and Grant. We covered all the subject matter. Very much, thank you. So I'll now hang up because we're still recording and gone live. And yeah, thank you.